We're joined today by Major Russ Cooper, founding member, board chair, president, and CEO of Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms, otherwise known as C3RF. Good day, Major.
Good day. Glad to be with you, Robert.
Yes, it's quite an honor because I know a little bit about your personal history, and I'm amazed at what you've accomplished in your life and what you're doing now. Now that you're retired, perhaps you can let our listeners know a little bit about yourself before we begin.
No, it's well. Thanks for that. I have stumbled through life and encountered many forks in the road, and basically chose to initially go the military route. I joined the military at the tender age of 17. I didn't have too many prospects coming. I was fairly good at school, but I didn't end at athletics. But I wasn't didn't really have the money available to go to university. So I wound up getting I guess you could call it a scholarship from the Royal Military College to go there for 4 years. And at the time, it was 1969. I'm really dating myself here, but it was at that time, in that time frame, they were flush on pilots and they didn't need any. So they told me that if you wanted to be a pilot, and I didn't really want to be a pilot, but I didn't want to be an infantryman, and I didn't want to go and sail boats on the ocean. So I said, I'll be a pilot. And well, they said, well, you've got to go to Royal Military College. And I said, okay, I'll go there. And then they said, well, if you go to Royal Military College, you have to take an engineering degree. So I took the engineering degree, even though I hated engineering. But I came out of it as a pilot, and from there on, spent about I say it wasn't really a scholarship because I had to pay with 28 years of service in the Air Force. And that took me through pilot training. It took me basically into fighter operations. I have flown the CF-104, CF-18. CF-18 was my last military billet, and that was flying billet, 88 to 91. So I got wrapped up in the Persian Gulf War as a deputy commander for the fighting contingent, the fighting squadron that went in to execute Operation Desert Storm on behalf of Canada. And it's a very interesting experience. From there, I went into a ground job with the military into weapons procurement. I used my expertise in the Persian Gulf War to try to address some shortfalls we had in weaponeering. We didn't have any precision-guided weapons. So I was on a project that brought precision-guided air-to-ground weapons on board for the CF-18. That put me in I was about 45, and it was if I was going to stay as a lifer, it was time to make the decision to stay in the military or go elsewhere. I decided to pursue different paths. I left the military, wound up flying business jets, training business jet pilots for Bombardier, and then went to Air Canada. And Air Canada, I spent about 11 years in Air Canada. I had to retire. They forced me out at age 60. That was terrible. But I flew some interesting aircraft there. DC-9, Airbus 320, the Boeing 777, which was a beautiful aircraft and job to have flying all over the Arctic, in crossing Siberia into China, into places like Hong Kong, going to Australia, going to Santiago, Chile. That was really something I really enjoyed. But I retired, and then it's kind of funny how things unfold. But as I was going through Air Canada, they went through bankruptcy, and I got flushed out of the bottom because of my seniority was so low. Like I was pretty old Air Canada pilot when I joined, and I was 48 years old. And I remember going to the first meeting. Our course, Air Canada course, got together, and we're sitting there over coffee, tea, and donuts. And these young guys would come up to me and ask me if I was one of the instructors, because I was, I guess at the time I was one of the oldest intakes they ever had at Air Canada. And so I got flushed out of the bottom of the Air Canada at the time of the bankruptcy. Had no job, kind of living on credit cards for a while there. And then I got a phone call. And this is where life is funny. You know, every now and then you find yourself in a tight spot, but it's funny how things unfold and opportunities present themselves. I got a phone call from an old CF-18 buddy of mine from Germany when I flew in Germany with him. And he said, we've got a job here, an engineering job up in Ottawa, and we're developing a cockpit, and we think we need a guy like you to help us. And they asked me, do you have an engineering degree? And I said, well, yeah, I do. I haven't used it for like 40 years, but I do have one. He says, well, if you have one, bring it up. We'll have a chat. And sure enough, I used that engineering degree that I absolutely hated. I hated to get him, and it got me into engineering. And I found myself operating as a what they call a human factors engineer. I was designing cockpit interiors, controls, logic to make it easy for pilots to know what the next step was in the cockpit as they were flying the aircraft. And so I developed a couple of cockpits. One of them actually is now flying with the United States Navy and Air Force as they call it the Texan T-6B. It's the original trainer aircraft, one prop, very good trainer, but now it has a complete glass cockpit in it, which I must say I had a hand in designing. So that got me into the engineering side of things, and then I found because of my operational background, I started helping Transport Canada assess designs, cockpit designs of the company I was working for. That led into becoming what they call a flight test delegate. I became a flight test pilot for Air Canada or for Transport Canada as a delegate. So they could ask me to go and take a look at this cockpit and sign it off or outline its problems, rectify it or whatever. So I wound up doing that and for a number of years before it was ultimately time to hang up the aircraft and just retire, enjoy my grandchildren. I got a bunch of them, and mostly all girls, and time to enjoy them. And then, sure enough, like I say, it's funny how things unfold. But I got engaged in around the 2017 timeframe with with the stuff that was coming out of the government. They were telling us. This was back in the time of Motion M103 when they said that Canada was systemically racist and Canada was full of religious discriminators. We're all a bunch of discriminators, and we're all Islamophobic. And I got listening to this, and I thought, like, this is absolutely crazy. This is off the wall. This is not true. And so I started with my background, and I do have a kind of a writing background as well with the from my desk duties in the military. And I have a security background because when I was with Air Canada, I operated as a security advisor because of my intelligence background that I garnered from the Persian Gulf War, and I was responsible for squadron intelligence and integrating it with the higher levels of intelligence of the Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. So I took all this and I started writing. I researched what they were saying, and I started writing to MPs about how these premises were wrong, the assumptions were wrong, and you're basically pushing through a motion that very likely is going to end up being a blasphemy law, and people's speech are going to be restricted unnecessarily. And so with that, I started looking around for some place to publish my material because it was starting to gain ground with the politicians. I was starting to get some response, and I started looking around for a place to publish this. And I met up with a like-minded person. Valerie Price is her name. I don't know if you know Valerie, but she's a wonderful lady. She runs Act for Canada, and she offered her website to post some of my stuff. So with that in place, we started doing petitions against MEM 103, and it turned into a real wild ride because we tapped into something in the Canadian psyche that was really thirsting for an opportunity to say no on this motion. And at the end of the day, we had a petition, had tens of thousands of signatures, and Member of Parliament Trust, Brian Truss, I believe his name is, he reported on his Facebook page that 2 days before the vote on motion M103, they had an unprecedented upwards of 900,000 emails coming into Parliament from regular everyday Canadian citizens saying, we don't want this motion. It was some sort of a record or something. They'd never seen anything like it. But, and this really stuck in my craw, but knowing all this, they still pushed it through. They pushed the motion through, made it happen, foisted it upon Canada and Canadians, even though it was, in my opinion, in my considered opinion, it was cod swallop. All of it was cod swallop. That started me down this civil liberties path, where I said to myself, look, if they're doing this and they're pushing this kind of stuff through, what are they going to do next? And that's when we formed a bunch of us, Valerie Price and a few others, Irving Weisdorf, Madeline Weld, just to name a few, Dan Mail. We all formed what was called C3RF, Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. We wanted to try to educate Canadians on their civil liberties, what they're entitled to, and what was going on, what was being taken away. So that's where we find ourselves now. That happened about, as I say, 2017 timeframe we formed, and it's been not looking in the rearview mirror ever since. It's always, this has become, I don't know how, but or why in Canada this should be the case, but this has become, I think, the most important issue before Canadians today is the loss of their civil liberties and their freedoms. And it's being taken away. And right now, these days, it's not even being under the covers. It's in your face now. They are taking our liberties away. They are proroguing government in critical time periods when parliamentarians should be sitting down discussing what is going on south of the border, for example. They're prorogued. They're locked out of the speaking chambers, and our voices are nowhere to be heard. It's all, the Liberal Party or the leader of the NDP or Premier Ford espousing how they're going to handle this. And quite frankly, they're going to drive us into the dirt with the way they're going on this. My opinion again, but that's where we find ourselves now. And so, from a guy that was fully happy to settle back, retire, enjoy my grandchildren, I'm probably working more now than I was ever. That's the way things go.
Thank you for that introduction. It's absolutely amazing. And I have a number of topics I'd like to broach in this discussion. But first, let our listeners know that they can go to C3RF. The website is canadiancitizens.org. And from there, you can see a number of the people who are involved with C3RF and how you can get involved with them as well. By the way, I too have a pilot's license.
Oh,
I don't know if you know that or not.
Yeah.
But my puttering around southwestern Ontario in a 152 doesn't compare to a 777 landing in Hong Kong. I can tell you that.
I don't. Yeah, I have a little experience in 152s, was it 172s, and quite frankly, that was fairly challenging. Those things.
They're fun because they're so analog.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any GPS stuff or anything like that. It's just analog, seat of your pants type of flying, which is so much fun.
Okay, fellow aviators, excellent.
So let's delve right into the Trump thing because it is so current and it is so important. Because I've been watching. Now I cannot stomach Liberal Party leadership debates, so I didn't watch it. I only heard the scuttlebutt about it and that it is all about Trump. Yeah. Because what he has done, he plays fifth dimensional chess. So I don't know if it's luck or intentional, but what he has done is set himself up as a galvanizer now for all of the politicians in Canada to come out and use him as one of those other fears that they can rally around and say, look, we're going to go to war with Trump. Trump is the bad guy. The United States is the bad guy. Prior to that, of course, what would have the debate have been about? It wouldn't have been about anything, really. Maybe about how racist Canadians are or Islamophobic, whatever that term means. It's an anti-concept. It doesn't mean anything. No. But Trump has come out with two things that people... forgive me if I get personal here, but Doug Ford is a buffoon. He's a thug and a buffoon. He really is. He's so low on the intellectual scale. It boggles the mind how Ontarians could have voted him in as premier. But that ad hominem aside, he's in good company with Pierre Poilievre, with Justin Trudeau, with Mark Carney, with Jagmeet Singh. All of these people are now lockstep against the tariffs, which, by the way, is a tax on Americans. People don't even realize that Americans will be paying more for Canadian products.
Yes.
And two is that offhand remark to Justin Trudeau, Governor Trudeau, about Canada becoming a 51st state, which it's just one of those Trumpisms, I think.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So
we could talk about that, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Don't want to go into the 51st.
I don't think it's such a Trumpism. I really don't think it's such a Trumpism. I think a great analysis, Robert, on you're saying it caught my attention. He galvanizes the opposition, and in doing that, what he does is I don't know if he does it on purpose, but he's showing us where the opposition is. He's okay. Who's the enemy? Who wants to take away American freedoms and rights? Well, you throw Trump in the mix, and he's the cat amongst the pigeons, and all of a sudden you can see where the pigeons they fly up, and there they are. There's the people that oppose our freedoms. There they are, right there. And he does that. He galvanizes. He's the heat sink. And he brings it all in, and I think it's so interesting that it's kind of a godsend that he was voted. He lost the 2020 vote, because in that four-year time period from 2020 to 2024, the people, especially Americans, got a great chance to see exactly what they were facing with the Biden administration, with the censorship, with the underhanded funding of agencies that were actually giving money to illegals to illegally cross into, the whole U.S. aid thing, the money that was going out the door to support wars that were against the interests of the nation. All of this stuff happened in that 4-year period. And then when Trump came back in 2024, I think people were more than ready to get him into power, to try to address just how far the country had fallen. So there he is. He's Trump. And when you talk about is he lucky or does he do this on purpose, I think there are too many things to be luck. There's either some divine intervention there, or he's as you say, a fifth dimensional chess player. But there's something really, really there's a seismic shift happening in the world today. And I think what we're seeing is we're seeing the old. They call it the liberal rules-based international order is crumbling in front of us. And what you're seeing Trump. I think I can see him casting back to the old Monroe Doctrine, where he says the Western Hemisphere is ours. It's our. This is our playground, our sandbox. No one's going to step inside it unless we let them. And he's forming a fortress North America. He does see Canada as a player, as either a partner or a 51st state in this whole thing, because he needs, on behalf of American security, to be able to intercede, to operate in the Arctic and keep the Russians, keep the Chinese, keep his northern border safe and secure. He's doing the same thing in the south with the Panama Canal. He's doing the same thing in Greenland. When you look at him going to take over Greenland, he says that's another Arctic installation that helps him with that North American Monroe Doctrine theory of his. So I think he's making moves on the chessboard that people think, or this is stupid, or he's dumb. But no, these all have an end game and an end goal in mind. And we've published a couple of papers at C3RF, one by Captain Barry Sheehy, retired. He talks about Trump. This is not a bluff, he says. And he goes into the background. He goes into the number of Russian bases that are being put up north, the alliance between the Russians and the Chinese starting to have influence in the Arctic as well, vis-a-vis Russia. So no, this is not a bluff. He sees the threats. And isn't it really, really interesting that J.D. Vance went to Europe in Munich just last week and told the Europeans that the United States, we can't be your ally if you're going to wall yourself off from your citizens and not listen to their voices. This is not, what America stands for. And the European parliamentarians, they were aghast. Like, again, this is unheard of. This is stupid. No, this is America telling the world what what it wants to do in the world, what kind of a country it wants to be, and you're with them or against them. And now we see that same focus shifting from Europe over to Canada. And now we're starting to hear stories about the Americans. They have a real problem with the amount of foreign interference in our politics, in our daily workings up here in Canada. They take a look, and Sam Cooper does some excellent reporting on this. I don't know if you know Sam, but he has a Substack called The Bureau. He writes on the growing numbers of money laundering activities, cartels and triads working with foreign governments and foreign money to produce fentanyl factories. Vancouver apparently is now a world distributor of money laundering strategies and tactics and money that's going all over the place. So again, now we're starting to hear the Americans start to rumble about this and offhandedly saying, well, maybe Canada shouldn't be part of Five Eyes because we can't trust them. Well, these are monumental statements. And these are things that Canada really needs to dig in deep and either confirm they're false, unfounded, or if they are, to do something about them. This is our own national security. This is Canadians on the hook. So very, very interesting times. And in all of this, we Canadians stand to. In my latest piece, I said Canada has three choices. It's always had three choices ever since 1867. They could go with America, go with the American system. They could go with the empire, which at the time, 1867, was the British Empire, or they could go it on their own. And I say those three options are laid out before us now, and we have to make a decision. Which way are we going to go? Are we going to go with America, be the 51st state? Go with the empire. The empire isn't the British Empire anymore, but it is this what they call the liberal rules-based order, international order that has become the new empire, that has basically taken over the West, taken over Europe, is now, I guess you could call it wokeism, you could call it post-nationalism, as Trudeau does. You could call it what you want, but it is an empire, and it sees itself with a cadre of leaders who are the lords, and they see the rest of us as vassals. Livestock is what I think they're aiming for when they look at 15-minute cities and all the rest of it. So Canadians, their own civil liberties are on the hook here. So this is certainly a time, I think, for C2RF to speak up and have a say on this whole horrendous seismic ground shift that's taking place right under our feet right now.
I think it started for most people in 2015 with the rise of Justin Trudeau and people like Iqra Khalid, who would call us all racists and Islamophobes at that time.
Yes. Yep.
To have the leader of a nation destroy your nation and deliberately tell you that he's going to destroy it. He did say Canada is the first post-national state. He did say that Canada has no core culture. He did say that he admires communist China because they can turn their economy around on a dime. And he did say that we're all racists. There you have the residential school unmarked graved hoax, Canadian flags flying at half-mast for half a year under the false belief, because of our media, our government-paid media, pushing a false narrative, totally unsubstantiated, to this day unproven. And when you see from 2015 to now, that's 10 years, so much has happened. And then, of course, you had the lockdowns. During that era, I moved from Ontario to where I am now in New Brunswick. I had to register with the government to tell that I'm going to cross the border. There's my mobility rights gone. By the way, the mobility rights are not subject to Section 33, the notwithstanding clause.
Oh, yeah.
So here I am having to register. I stopped by the RCMP at the border there by Edmundston, and they say, "Where are you going and what are you doing and who are you?" And I say,
Yeah.
"I own property here. I'm going here. Here's my purchase agreement for my property." And he goes, "Okay, I'm just going to come out of my kiosk now and approach your vehicle. I'm not wearing a mask. He's of course all masked up." And that process was such an affront to me as a Canadian to have my
Yes.
rights violated
Yes.
by the RCMP, who do the policing here in New Brunswick. A lot of people woke up. If Trudeau's ascendance didn't wake them up, because that was like a slow process of injuries over 5 years before the COVID thing happened, then it was the lockdowns. Then, like I say, if you didn't wake up by 2015, and if you haven't woke up by COVID, then you're brain dead. You really don't know what's going on here. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, in my estimation, the majority of Canadians still don't know what's going on here because they're willing to continue to vote in idiots like Mark Carney or,
Yeah.
forgive me, I mean, you're probably not a partisan organization's 33RF, so I will
No.
attack Pierre Poilievre as well
Yeah.
for what
Okay.
he did during this whole era. And Jagmeet Singh, they're still willing to vote them in, even though we know now that our Charter of Rights and Freedoms is not really worth the paper it's written on, the way it has been interpreted.
Not now.
That's a lot to unpack. Well, why don't you unpack that for me? What
Okay.
was this impetus for people to wake up?
Before I do, you made an interesting analogy there. You said that, up front in 2015, all of a sudden we were a post-national state. We had no, I think the terminology was we had no mainstream values, no core identity, is what Trudeau said. So that, the past, it was gone. It was like we're starting over again at year zero, like as the Nazis did in
Yeah,
Germany.
so what did you fight for? What did you fly your CF-18s for if it wasn't
Well,
for a Canadian identity?
Well, now you're hitting a nerve because that is exactly why I became so perturbed with Motion M103. I did not take a shine to someone telling me after I stepped up, I fought for my country, I put my life on the line. My family suffered when I was down there, and all the CNN coverage was showing all the missiles coming up at us, and they were back at home looking at all this, wondering if my husband or my daddy's okay. After all that, I come back and they tell me that me and my buddies are racist and me and my buddies are religious discriminators. We worked hand in hand with Muslim Air Force pilots, Muslim troops over there. We were fighting to free a Muslim state, and I'm the problem here. Well, just oh, it was just terrible. So that got me started. And now, isn't it funny? Isn't it funny? Now you say that Trudeau came out and says we're a post-national state, we have no core values. But look what's happening today. We have Trump in the South. Okay, he's mentioning 51st state and all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden they want us to wrap the flag around us and be patriotic. You have to be patriotic now. Well, we don't. I thought you told us we didn't have a Canada. We had no core values. He said, no, no, no. You have to fight for your values now against Trump. So this is all situational, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's all codswallop. We're being fed a load of baloney is what we're being fed. We're being fed propaganda.
I interviewed, or should I say, well, I know personally Dick Field. He's dead now, unfortunately, but he fought in the Second World War in Italy campaign for Canada. And he gave
That
a
was a
speech.
tough one.
Yeah.
That
And
was a
he
tough
gave
one.
a speech in London, Ontario, many years ago. Now you can still find it on our channel, both Rumble and YouTube. It was actually a book launching for Salim Mansour's book on multiculturalism.
Yeah.
And so Dick
Yeah.
Field gets up there and he gave a little speech about what he did in World War II and why he fought. And he said, none of us fought for multiculturalism. It didn't exist. We fought for
Yeah.
Canada.
Yeah.
So to go from, now I imagine you're in your 70s, I don't want to have a guess, but I'm in my 60s. So you get a few years on me.
You
But
young upstart.
yeah, so we've seen over the decades such a dramatic shift in what we thought this country was about to the way it is today. And when you get that view from 35,000 feet that we have, not just literally, but figuratively,
Mhm.
then you get an appreciation for what we've lost.
Yes.
Is that what C3RF is about? Trying to reclaim what we've lost?
Trying to restore the original intent of the nation. And I do it because, well, I started because they really pissed me off. But I do it now because I've got grandchildren, and they're going to grow up in a Canada that I would like to see be the same kind of Canada that I grew up in. That was a Canada that lived by the golden rule, live and let live. Welcome people, new people into your neighborhood, and build the community together. But not force anybody to think a certain way or do anything in particular. But people would be free to do as they pursue their own happiness. That's what C3RF is really about, is restoring what we had and giving it to handing it off to future generations. Hopefully, hopefully we can make some sort of a mark in that regard. But if you're not trying, you're not going to get anything done, I guess. But as they say, you only lose when you quit. And so it's important to keep fighting for the Canada that we know is there, but is being taken away from us. I think is what is actually going on. We have an ideology or a set of ideologies. That, quite frankly, when you look at the problems in the world that we're facing, is wokeism. Isn't it funny that the only nations that really suffer from it are the Western nations? You don't see this stuff going on in China.
No.
You don't see them saying there's 73 genders in China. You don't see this going on anywhere except for the Western nations, predominantly the Western world, Western civilization. I think this is an attempt to take down Western civilization and all that it stands for and all that it's done. They're trying to erase it. And it really does get back to, I guess you could say, it gets back to some sort of a Marxist ideology, where it's all about the dialectic. It's all about thesis, what you think is objective reality being attacked by its opposite, smashing them together, and then ending up with a synthesis that it makes for a new and better world and a better man. That seems like the kind of process we're going through, where we're smashing the old, we're taking down the traditions, we're toppling the statues of John A. Macdonald, and we're smashing it with these new crazy ideas about gender, about sex, about everything else that, quite frankly, is unsupported and nonsensical. But in the end, you end up with a synthesis, a new world where, I think the world they envisage is one where there's a small group of lords hosting over a large segment of vassals, livestock. We're going to be the livestock, and I think that's the way it's going. And I don't know. It's my opinion, but I can't help but have it after taking a look at all the things that are being put in place to develop that turnkey moment. There was a NASA retired gentleman, Bill. I forget his last name, but he came up with the concept of the turnkey moment. And he said, this is in 2012. He said he worked for the NSA. And he said, if you look at what the NSA is doing, it's putting all the building blocks, all the pieces, all the keystones, they're assembling them, and it's all coming into place. And when they've got it all together, they're going to turn the key. And when they turn the key, your life changes, and all of a sudden you live in a 15-minute city, and you've got to justify everywhere you go, and you've got a carbon footprint card, and you can't buy that chocolate bar because you're out of points. You're going to have to do something else. So I think they're working us up to a turnkey moment. I think Trump is working to make sure that doesn't happen. And I wish I could say that there are more in Canada that were working against the turnkey moment, but the evidence is there, and a good chunk of it comes out of as you say, the COVID time period, where we had a problem. okay, we're going to flatten the curve for a couple of weeks. Remember, just a couple of weeks, and that turned into a couple of years and more. And all of that stuff went on. And on the Canadian scene, there was hardly anybody who spoke up about it. And all the political parties sitting in Parliament, they all went along with it. I mean, there were a couple of outliers, in the Conservative Party. Kathy Wagenthal, I remember her making a fuss when they wouldn't let her in Parliament, and she said, "Well, no, she got her back up. She had a little bit of a spine about it, but other than that, there was very, very little. Everybody was." O'Toole at the time, he was the leader of the Conservative Party. He was saying we need more. We've got to have more restrictions.
He wanted to impose the Emergencies Act right at the very beginning.
Yeah, and at the time, remember they only had 36 MPs in Parliament. Remember they told everybody to go home.
Yes.
And for the longest time, they couldn't even zoom in. They couldn't even zoom in. We just had 36 parliamentarians sitting, representing the whole of Canada, all Canadians with 36 parliamentarians. I guess lucky for me, I think my MP here in the Ottawa area was sitting in Parliament to, able to voice my concerns. But there are a whole bunch of more than 300 other parliamentarians who weren't representing their constituents at all. So when the times got tough, the tough didn't get going. They left. They left the Parliament buildings, and now we're seeing it happen again. We've got this so-called threats from a Trump America with tariffs, and what have they done? They've prorogued Parliament. They've locked the doors. Parliamentarians can't get in there to say, "Hey, wait a minute. I don't think we should go that way with Trump. I don't think we should shut off his energy supplies. Are you crazy? What if he shuts off Line 5 out of Michigan into Ontario and Quebec? What happens if that ends up with Line 9 shutting down? Quebec has got no more natural gas." They're not thinking. But there's no one in Parliament to say, "Hey, have you thought of this?" Because they're all at home, baking cookies. It's crazy.
Part of the 51st state proposal by Trump got a lot of people thinking about what is it about the United States that is good and what is bad. And perhaps, joining the United States might be a good idea. And of course, I'm thinking that about that too. Mind you, it wouldn't be a 51st state. It would be every single province joining as states, and then you'd have 2 senators from every one of those, and they'd all be on the left. They'd all be Democrat or liberal. So
that's
except
why,
for
that's
maybe
why
Alberta.
Trump only wants one. That's why Trump only wants one state. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So, but the thing is that once you start analyzing what is good about the states, and it is an exemplar of freedom in the world, the first written constitution, the first state to say, "We the people." And that is the first thing that I would approach in my discussion with you today, is the difference between an American Constitution, or even an Indian, by the way. Indian Constitution also says, "We the people." We establish a socialist state, but that's completely different. The American Constitution, "We the people are sovereign." In Canada, the people are not sovereign. It says right in our documents, Parliament is sovereign, and Parliament, of course, is comprised of the lower house, the Senate, and the monarch.
Yes.
So when you have this stumbling block of us being slaves without status, not sovereign, comparing that to the United States where the people are sovereign, boy, it sure does look tempting to say, like, maybe that's all we really need is to do that. Now, or a constitutional debate in Canada by saying, look, let's put in this little clause here that Salim Mansour, by the way, has come up with. Did a video about it with him, where all you have to do is saying that these rights are derived by the will of the people.
Yes, I've seen that. Yeah,
that's all you need. And then all of a sudden, that mindset will come into the Canadian zeitgeist, and we'll understand that Parliament is not sovereign. We're sovereign. What do you think of that idea of constitutionally tinkering with our own documents to emulate the good things that exist in the United States?
I see the American Constitution. I have a lot of respect for it. It is genius. It truly is genius, and it was written by men in a day and age when they took the classical liberal thoughts of thinkers at the time, Locke and Smith and others, and they put together a document that, for the first time ever, I think, recognized the authority of a power above and beyond man. And they put everything under, it's through in God we trust. We live as a nation under God, and that set up the whole thing. Where you taught what the Constitution does is it tosses it back to an ideology, to a belief system based on the living God concept, a living God that cares for its people, a living God that people organize themselves under, and the whole premise there being that the people exist as individuals, and the American Constitution is all about the individual under God, forming a government, okay, under God, but as individuals, and it's all very much recognizes the value, the sanctity, the worth of the individual. And that's what makes it all work, because when you break everything down to individual rights, then all of the group stuff, the collective stuff, all of that becomes secondary, and it's the individual pursuing his own happiness that makes things work. And sure enough, it's people, if you let them loose to pursue their own happiness, they're going to encounter obstacles that they will overcome themselves, because people are pretty inventive and pretty innovative. They don't need the help of a government to sort them out like we do in Canada. If you look at all the Ontario election campaign, it's all about, all the leaders are running around saying, we're going to make life easier for you. We're going to give you money to do this. We're going to give you cradle to grave. But why? It doesn't work, because the government can never do that as efficiently, as effectively as the individual can do for himself. Now, the Canadian instance, okay, now you talk about changing, switching up the Canadian Constitution. Before I get into that, if you go the American route, just to say we want to become the 51st state. I've taken a look at this, and what you have to do is you have to petition to become a territory. And with that petition, Canada will have to come up with a constitution that lines up with the American Constitution. So we'll have to go through that process, and then you'll have to present it to the Senate and the Congress, and Senate needs to approve. It basically becomes a treaty of cessation. Basically, the Senate has to approve it by 2/3 vote, because it's a treaty. Then it goes to the Congress. They have to ratify it. So after all this time, then it goes to the president. He signs it off, and you become a territory. Now you can petition to become a state. And now Puerto Rico has been doing this for decades and decades and decades, and they're still not a state. So does Canada really want to go down this route where it becomes the 51st state, and decades later, they still aren't a state? They've basically lost their political power, because it's all been signed over to the government of the United States, and they're sitting there as a 51st state with twiddling their thumbs. I don't think that's a way to go. I think my personal opinion is we have to take what we have and work with it. There was a time when our system did work. There was a time when the intent was respected. The intent behind the charter was respected. And, we did have our freedoms, and they were protected. So can we get back to a place where the intent is reestablished? And you say that Salim came up with an idea. Well, we're going to put in accordance with the will of the people, and that's going to focus attention on the true intent. I think, in talking with Brian Peckford, that the intent, I think, is already there. I think the intent of the whole charter and the Constitution is there in the preamble. And the preamble says that Canada is a nation that is founded upon the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Well, right there, right in that preamble, which is supposed to set out the guidelines for the development of the rest of the charter that comes after it. Okay, these are the fences, these are the guide rails. So if the charter is saying up front that we're a nation that respects the principle of the supremacy of God, basically what you have is we the people under a God that we trust. Basically, in Canada, we have, if you look at that preamble, we have what the Americans have. It's just that we've thrown that preamble away. Canadians haven't thrown it away. Our judges have thrown it away, and our politicians let them throw it away. There was a judge in BC who, when the preamble came up in a court case, she was the Supreme Court of BC. I forget her name, but she said the preamble and the supremacy under the supremacy of God clause was a dead letter, and from that point on, it's not even a consideration anymore. But really, it's the most critical portion of the charter is that preamble, because it tells us that the intent is to operate under a belief system, a higher authority that respects the individual, wants the individual to succeed, and is so valuable that this individual has fundamental rights, and the fundamental rights come out in Section 2. So there you have the preamble and you have Section 2. You put those together, dump everything else, and basically you have something that's very close to the American Constitution. So how can we change things so that this observation, this reality, this truth, and it is truth, because Brian Peckford, he was a framer of the charter. He said that was our intent, and he's still alive and he's still saying it. So it is true.
We owe a debt of gratitude to Brian Peckford for standing up when he did during the COVID era and speaking his mind and telling people what the intent was during the constitutional discussions. Now, I remember Brian Peckford because at that time, when he was Premier of Newfoundland, I was a Newfoundlander and I was living there. So I know his government quite well.
Yeah.
But I found it odd that for decades, while charter decisions had been made, I never heard from Premier Peckford.
Yes.
But I just find it odd that, first of all, he hasn't put this in memoirs or writings, much like the Federalist Papers in the United States are referred to quite often.
He did write a book
Yes.
about the charter days and the drafting of the charter. He put that all down in print.
Someday the sun will shine and have
That's
not
it.
will be no more. Yes, I have a
That's
copy
right.
of it.
Yeah.
But it's not so much a book about the decisions that went on in that, and to the explicitness that he later said during
Yeah.
the COVID. But what gets me is that while this is all well and good, the intent was there. As I interviewed Bruce Pardy, who's a law professor in Ontario, and I said this to him. I said, well, Brian Peckford says the intent is Section 1 is against sedition, against war. And Bruce Pardy said it so succinctly. He said, that's not what it says.
Mhm.
And if you're a lawyer and if you're in court and you're trying to make a case using Section 1, which says you basically have these rights which are, demonstrable in a free and democratic society, very nebulous terms, free, democratic society,
Reasonable. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, then reasonably demonstrable as well. That's probably the most important part. Then as a lawyer, what Brian Peckford says later on, decades later on, 40, 50 years later on, about what they meant is irrelevant. It's what it says. And Section 1 basically says you've got no rights unless we decide that you do. Because we're the arbiters of democracy. We're the parliament. We decide.
Mhm.
So, and Section 33, the notwithstanding clause, which allows provinces an escape clause for certain sections of the Constitution or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So while we owe a debt of gratitude to Mr. Peckford, it's insufficient. This document, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is insufficient. When you hold it up against the amendments to the United States Constitution, First Amendment, Second Amendment especially, the right to talk and the right to fight for your rights,
Yep.
we don't have anything like that.
No.
It says freedom of speech and the press, but under Section 1, that's been curtailed. Hate speech laws, M103.
Oh yeah.
We don't have the rights that the United States does. So I'll go back to what I was talking about before. The three things that I liked about the States: we the people, 1A and 2A. Freedom of speech, right to bear arms. We don't have those things. So based on that alone, I wouldn't mind being taken over by the states, though I think that we can do better than they've done it. I think
Yeah.
we should look at our own house, put it in order, and learn from them.
I'm
And
with you. I'm with you totally on that. Putting our own house in order, taking what we have, and making it what we want. And I think one of um, the things that needs to be done is the people in Canada have to have more of a say, and just who is interpreting the charter, just who is ruling on over us on behalf of the charter. And what we find now in Canada is we have this system where political parties have come to have far too powerful say in the dealings and the day-to-day dealings of our governance system. We have Brian Peckford. He put forward what he calls his Magna Carta for Canada, and he has a list of things that need to be done or changes that need to be put in place, basically to give the citizen the voice he deserves in his halls of political power or judicial power or whatever. And he talks about having the party system come under a microscope. Like every year they're going to have to submit audits on their finances and and detail where the money's coming from and where it's going. He talks about changing the way that judges are selected, and he talks about changing the powers of the prime minister to basically a prime minister in Canada, especially with a majority government. He is basically a dictator. He makes all the appointments. He pushes the appointments to the governor general, but he appoints all the senators. He appoints all the judges at the federal level. He even appoints the governor general. I mean, it's just that if you just homed in on that set of powers, there's a lot you could do right there to get rid of this evolving dictatorship that Canada is becoming.
you
I mean,
have
it's
to go
become
back
so
to
bad. It's become so bad in Canada. You can have a prorogue parliament, and you can still have a prime minister running around giving $5 billion to Ukraine. What else has he done? He's making all these decisions as he's walking out the door, with a prorogued parliament, and no one to say to oppose or debate him. I mean, this is dictatorship.
he's
It's
stacked
terrible.
the Senate again, which is something I have against Stephen Harper. When he left office, he left something like 30 seats in the Senate empty. What an idiot!
Yeah, I know.
Excuse me, but what an idiot! You know,
All
you
that.
have Trudeau. He's on the way
Trudeau's
out.
not
What does he
doing
do?
that.
He stacks the Senate with the sycophants.
No, he's stacked the courts with the same kind of personalities, and now any intent the charter really did have is it has been washed away by what they call the living tree approach to the charter. It's a living tree. It changes as society changes, as times change, as we find more and more genders. The charter changes because it's a living tree. Again, more codswallop is what that is. There is an intent behind the charter. There's an intent behind the way it was set up. So much so that back in the early '80s, mid '80s, this whole question of what does Section 1 mean? What's demonstrable? What's when things have to be demonstrably justified? What does that mean? The Supreme Court of the day, they came up with what they call the Oakes test. And the Oakes test set out three basic steps as to that you had to walk through to determine whether or not a restriction on a right was justified or not. And they said basically it had to be the restriction had to be tied to the objective of the law that's being considered, and it had to be proportional. It couldn't you couldn't be hitting a fly with a hammer with this new restriction in rights, and it had to be as minimal as possible. Well, even now that Oakes test has been flushed down the toilet. They don't use it anymore, and you can see during the COVID era when the courts were ruling on rights being abused by the COVID pandemic measures, the courts would say, well, we don't have to justify, this being reasonable. We don't have to justify that it's needed. All we need is to know is that the government thinks it's okay, and the government they're well versed in these things. So we're just going to go with the government. So they didn't even go through the process, the first section of the charter process of making a determination on whether it was demonstrably justified. The courts just said, oh, if the government says so, we're just going to go along with it. Basically, they're working. This is the way the courts in Nazi Germany used to work. They gave full deference to Hitler's government, and anything he came down with, the courts just kind of rubber stamped and said, okay, no, anybody who argues against this in courts is wrong. And that's exactly where we've gone now. So
I saw in a previous interview that you did, you were talking about the Frankfurt School and how these quasi-intellectuals in Germany, Frankfurt, got together and introduced concepts that have destroyed what we have taken for granted, which is an objective reality, and
yes,
and replaced it with moral relativism, cultural Marxism. Now, I found it interesting that that school developed during the Weimar Republic of Germany in the 30s, late 1928 into the early 30s. And
yes,
recently, in Europe, they just got together, Poland and Germany and France, I believe, and then other states started coming on board, to something they called Weimar Plus.
hmm.
I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, I
And
suppose I've heard of it.
I don't know if they're aware of their history. But the Weimar Republic in Germany was responsible for the rise of Hitler because it was an era of political instability,
Yes,
social depravity, an anything goes, moral relativistic type of society. So
rapid inflation.
that would
Yeah,
allow somebody like an authoritarian, in this particular case, it was Hitler, to come in
yeah,
and shake things up.
yep,
So here we now have Weimar Plus in Europe.
yes.
You know,
Well,
in a period of
if you watch what's going on in Europe and you watch the restrictions the populace are coming under, we're seeing in actually J.D. Vance in Munich recently talked about this. He said, European leaders are walling themselves off from their own constituents, and they're putting people in jail for years
yes,
for an inappropriate meme on X. People are going to jail. It has really become quite draconian, and England is absolutely unrecognizable because they're putting people in jail for saying the wrong thing. Cops are actually coming up the door, banging the door, and taking people out of their homes because they said something untoward on X that made someone feel uncomfortable, and that's basically the charge. And they're hoisting them off the jail. Meanwhile, we've got people running around downtown Europe, stabbing, clubbing, bombing. Sweden, almost every day now, there's a bomb goes off in Sweden. Sweden now has the highest rape rate in Europe. I mean, rape was unheard of in Sweden 20 years ago. So we have this situational law being applied. It's not the rule of law. Another founding principle of our charter is absolutely gone because one law may apply to you, but it doesn't apply to that guy over there because he's got favored status. And we're seeing this in Canada when we have these protesters who support Hamas running up and down the streets, firing bullets into synagogues and Jewish schools, defacing buildings, creating vandalism. The cops give them coffee and donuts. Meanwhile, we've got Tamara Leach. She's still waiting for a court decision on her mischief charge from 3 years ago.
or they arrest Ezra Levant, a Jew, doing journalism covering these Hamas protesters, and they
Yes,
arrest him.
yes, yes.
Weimar Plus, indeed, yeah, but it's on this side of
Indeed,
the pond.
indeed. We're in a bad place here, and I kind of thank God for Trump because I mean he's now. What do you say about Trump? Like you talk about the Weimar Republic birthing the likes of Hitler, strongman. Okay, to get the country out of the mess it's in. Some might say that Trump could be cast in that same shadow. I don't think so. I don't think so because I think, unlike Hitler, I think Trump has the vast support of the American people, and I think he's there in 2024 solely because of the people who voted him in. And Hitler, on the other hand, Hitler, he comes from the other side of the political house that Canada's in, where the political party is the preeminent authority, and he used that party system in his party to basically crush any dissonance, any challenges from the people of Germany. And he basically he had to destroy the Constitution of Germany. He overrode it to get where he became the dictator. He overrode it for initially for 5 years, and then it became permanent. And we had World War II. And doesn't that sound familiar? Like in Canada, we have these problems, and all of a sudden we're proroguing Parliament. Our representatives are no longer allowed to sit. Oh, it's so dire. We have to have a one-man solution here. We have to, Trudeau's the man. He's going to do it for us. Doug Ford's the man. He's going to do it for us. That is not the Trump experience. Trump is the people speaking, and Hitler and the other chaps are the party or the individual speaking to crush the people below. Two different situations.
Absolutely. Trump is no more of a dictator than, he can't be a dictator.
No.
He has certain powers constitutionally, and he's exercising them, and he has a mandate from the people, both in the lower house, the upper house, and the popular vote to do what he said he would do, which would include Elon Musk and Doge.
And he's not short-circuiting the Constitution. You could say that Biden short-circuited the Constitution on many times, times when he used the DOJ, the Justice Department, to go after his enemies. He was avoiding the Constitution many times. When he went against the laws of the land and gave money to organizations to bring illegals across the border. Again, he was anti-constitutional. No, Trump is not going against the Constitution. If anything, he's using the Constitution and the power of the people to allow him to do what he wants to do. Yeah.
For sure. So what do you see? I mean, we're painting a rather bleak picture, and it seems as if we've dug ourselves into a hole constitutionally, the way this country is made up, that we can't get out of without some sort of perhaps revolution. Hopefully a peaceful one, but a revolution, because our own laws have hamstrung us. We cannot act to change anything. And a lot of that has to do with Quebec. I've called Canada a failed state, and it will collapse because of the way we have structured. For example, the Supreme Court has to have 3 Quebec justices. At a time when Quebec's population, vis-a-vis the rest of the country, is declining, that will not stand. 50, 100 years from now, it doesn't matter. It could be sooner than that. But people are going, why do we have 3 Quebec judges out of 9 when they only represent, right now, it's 22% of the population? That could fall to 10%. And why do we have fewer representation in the Senate from the Western states than, for example, Newfoundland, I think, has 6 Senate seats, versus, and PEI, 3, I think. So this imbalance cannot stand.
No, it can't. And I think, like you, I wish for a rethink, a peaceful one. But I do think we need a rethink. And I think the proof is in the pudding. We've seen how our system, the way it's devolved, is quite frankly just not good enough. It's not representative of the people. It needs to be changed. It needs to be rethought. A couple of ways you could go. I guess you could look back at the Statute of Westminster back in 1931, when Canada formally left the colonial status and became a dominion of its own accord, with its own autonomy, with its own freedom, with its own ability to operate on the world stage with its own voice. That's 1931. But that statute, it's interesting because when you look at it, it really afforded the provinces a lot of power, because it ceded to the provinces, each province, sovereignty. And sovereignty basically means it is your land. And that statute gave sovereignty, the land, to the provinces. The whole statute left a whole bunch of things unresolved, though, and one of those things was the relationship of the crown to all this new dominion that had these powerful individual sovereign provinces. So that's still up in the air. It was never really addressed to this day. Maybe it's time to have a constitutional federation, a federation of constituents to discuss the Constitution and where we go from here, and resolve the issues that didn't get resolved back in 1931. But I could see, the way to go would be increased decentralization. Give the provinces, each one of them, more powers to do what it likes to do, and keep the federation up top, the federal federation, fairly loose and weak, and it could only do the things that a federal government needed to do: defense, border control, international trade and commerce, those things. Okay, fine. But it was be totally the provinces would be unto themselves, much like the states are in the United States, and they would have the power and the authority to act on their own behalf in these widespread areas. And I think, well, there's the answer for Quebec. I mean, they want to be their own nation. They want to be decentralized to the point where they can be their own nation. Okay, there you go. And
We are, after all, a confederation.
we are a confederation, and it's not being treated like a confederation. We have people in power in Parliament now who look at this country as one ball that's under their control, and that's the furthest away from the intent of the confederation as you can get.
I
So I
think
think there are things
perhaps.
we can do.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Make a list. One of them, I think, was money. Um, in
Hmm.
1867, when the three provinces, Canada, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, joined to become the four provinces, then at that time, there was no central bank. That didn't happen in Canada till after the central bank in the United States, 1917, I think it was in this country, but I could be wrong on that. 13 in the States, Federal Reserve, a little later here with Bank of Canada.
Yeah.
But when that happened, 1867, banks issued money. You had the Bank of Montreal, and you can still find it online, the notes. Bank of Montreal, issued, pay to the bearer on demand, these kinds of things, because you
Okay.
have
Okay.
gold in their vaults. Bank of
Yes.
Nova Scotia, Bank of Commerce, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce came later, I think. But you see what I mean? At
Yep.
that time, the federal government was weak until they had a central bank come in, and now they just go to that bank and said, "We'd like $1 trillion, please, to give to
Yes.
people to sit at home during this fake, scare."
Yes.
And
Yes.
and now our dollar is worth nothing.
Yep.
It's absolute. It's next to absolutely nothing.
Yep. It's not backed by anything. Yep.
No, so I mean, that's an issue. I don't know that you've ever tackled that with C3RF, but the ability for our federal government to just go and take credit, or receive credit from the Bank of Canada,
Yeah. We
and
talk.
just, why are we paying taxes if that's what they can do?
Yeah, exactly. At C3F, we look at the economy as a component part of a free nation. To be free, you have to have an economy that allows people to do what they want, and you have to have, it's why we have a market-based economy, a free market that allows prices to be determined by supply and demand, and there's a rationale or a reason, a person-based reason behind the way the economy works. But now with these central banks, having the power to just print money, you kind of wash all of that away. All of the controls that are put in place by just having people who can, with putting their hand inside the economy to do something, are actually affecting things like prices and stuff like that. Uh, with these central banks, you can get away from that. And we're finding now that the states, I mean, when you look at the $40 trillion deficit or debt that they have, they are coming to the realization under Trump that it's unsustainable and we got to do something. And now you see, okay, tariffs are going to take over from taxes, and these different methods of recovering or paying down the debt are being developed. Canada is in exactly the same boat. As a matter of fact, back in 1994, I don't know if you remember it, we had a currency crisis when the bonds, we had so much debt on board in 1994 that when we put our bonds in the market to be picked up by buyers, no one initially was buying. We had a debt crisis, and it was at that point that Chrétien, he came up with all these sweeping changes. He cut back the federal workforce. Remember, they fired tens of thousands of people in Ottawa. They cut back on all the social payments to the provinces, and the provinces had to squawk, and it was just, but they had to do something drastic to get the debt under control. And Canada under Trudeau is in much that is fast approaching those magic debt numbers, to the point where people abroad are not going to buy our bonds. And so when you have that kind of a situation developing, now you're looking at really impacting the ability of Canadians to live their lives and pursue their own happiness, because you're putting them into a money crunch that is just debilitating to their own lives and the way the opportunities that lay out before them. So that we cover the economy from that perspective, how it impacts civil liberties, but no, we don't get deep into the machinations of how the bank works. And but I must say, I did write once on 1974. There was a court case brought forward where the Trudeau government decided he wanted the Central Bank of Canada to come under the International Settlement Bank, which is the worldwide money controller, the worldwide bank. And once we joined that took away basically all the freedoms and sovereignty that our own Bank of Canada had, and it seconded it to this International Settlement Bank organization. And there was a time before 1974 where you look at I talk about the golden age in Canada. Back in the 50s, when I was just a kid, I remember being so proud of Canada because we were doing so much on the world stage. We were really respected. We had, at the time, the fourth largest Air Force, coming off World War II, the third largest Navy. We were a component part of European defense and NATO with our fighter squadrons. We had tons of Sabres over there that were flying around keeping the skies safe. It was just one heck of a time to be a Canadian. And I remember at that time, had all these big projects going on. We had Trans-Canada Pipeline. We had Trans-Canada Highways going across the country. We had a nuclear industry that was being spun up in Chalk River. We had all these things that we were doing. We were becoming such a forward-looking nation. And at that time, Bank of Canada had the ability to lend out money, no interest. And so for these major nation-building projects, the Bank of Canada could be counted on to fund them, no interest, and give these entrepreneurs a chance at building the country out. It was the same time that we put military bases across the country. Just so many things were going on, and that all came back. And then we suborned that to the International Settlement Bank, and all of a sudden, you don't have that ability anymore to make your own national priorities with regards to money lending. And it was gone. We had to become part of the worldwide organization. That's as early as 1974. We started becoming, part of this new world order, I guess.
There's two topics I'd like to talk about, Russ, before we end the conversation. And that is, they're rather large, so I don't know how much time you want to spend on them, but one is education, the other is journalism. Oh. Let's talk about journalism first, because education is more of a provincial matter, but I think it speaks to the culture of Canada. But journalism, when Trudeau came out and actually bought the press, paid them for trusted sources,
$600 million.
It was the death of a free press in Canada, because a free press, by definition, should not be beholden to the state. They are the fourth estate, which keeps them in check, and now that's eroded. It's gone. You cannot trust anything that is in the press, whether it's radio, TV, or the newspapers anymore. It's like Pravda in Russia. Yep. You have to read between the lines, or anything that they say is false. What's your take on how buying the press has destroyed the freedoms that you're fighting for?
Oh, it is. Talk about a huge impact on your own civil liberties. To be free, you have to have an informed public. the public has to know really what's going on. What is the truth of the matter? And the way to do that is to have a press that's putting the facts out there, and if anything, not editorializing, but allowing you to look at the facts and look at both sides of the story and come up with your own conclusions. That is what a free press is supposed to do. Now, as you say, it has been this whole wave of internet revolution has really put in place the ability for individuals to get involved and do their own journalism, and it's all over the place. It's you see people have actually turned to these new independent outlets like yours for their facts, for their to see what's going on in the world and see what various people are thinking. They're going to people like you or me with my podcast. And that has taken that circulation power away from the legacy media to the point where they've had to go looking for money, and now you set and train the whole bit about where the money they are getting is coming from government to keep them afloat. And oh, by the way, there's the money comes with strings attached, and we'd like you to report this way and this way and this way in that story. And you see it is just embarrassing. I mean, it's so in your face and it's so obvious. When you look at CTV National News or you look at CBC, I mean, it's just totally spun for the political party that's paying the freight for the legacy media. And I guess you can see it's really starting to shake out now south of the border, where it's more advanced down there. This whole bit about individual journalism has really taken hold there with the Joe Rogans, the Tucker Carlsons, and all the rest of it. But what you're seeing is that the legacy media is shaking down, and I just saw in the news the other day that Joy Reid, MSNBC Joy Reid, who's basically is not really a journalist, but she's got her opinions and her opinions only. She's being dropped. People can see what the truth of the matter is. More and more, they're seeing the truth of the matter because of these independent organizations and the legacy media stars. Jim Acosta, he's gone the way of the buffalo. Levin, he's in the field with Jim Acosta buffalo, and now Joy Reid. I mean, it's all crashing down. Canada. Now CBC is talking about pumping double the money. The government's talking about putting double the money into with Saint Orange, the Minister for Heritage. Our legacy media needs double the money because it is the only way that we can tell the Canada story, that we can promote our culture. Remember before how we had no culture in 2015, but now we do have a culture, and it has to be protected with hundreds of millions of dollars. It's incredible, isn't it? But it's all coming down, and I put it I put that on the individual journalist who is actually doing the job of seeking objective truth. Is what he's doing, what they're doing. So I see that as a story that's not finished yet, but I think the legacy media is, unless it does something to restore its own credibility, it's done. It's gone.
I would hope it's done and it's gone. I think it really needs to go.
It's embarrassing. Yeah, it's embarrassing.
Education. If we're talking about changing politics, as Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. The Canadian culture is in dire need of an enema.
Yeah.
And to do that, I think that you have to get into the education component of it, which is provincial in this country, essentially, unless you're talking about the universities, which is another kettle of fish there. But provincially, I got involved in education. Back in the 90s, I read a report. I was just having young children coming to the system. I put them into Montessori for a few years so at least they'd learn how to read and write. And then they go into the public system. It was an OECD report that said that 17% of Ontario high school graduates were functionally illiterate.
Yes.
Graduates. Mm-hmm. What are they doing getting a diploma if they cannot read and write or if they're functionally illiterate?
Yes.
So I was so upset. I ran for trustee. I became a trustee on the London School Board for a term and then the Thames Valley District School Board for a term, and tried to do what I could to tell people that the child-centered learning approach I think you mentioned it before in another interview, the Hall Dennis report of '68, I think it was.
Yes, exactly.
Well,
Yeah,
I was embroiled in all of that kind of stuff, the changes from
yeah,
education, phonics, which is the only proven method to teach somebody how to read English and read and write English, to the child-centered approach, which was a dismal failure. Look, say back in the '70s, and
oh,
then
terrible.
other types of they tried to change the name of it all the time.
Yeah,
Philosophically incorrect. It was
yeah,
absolutely philosophically incorrect. And if you go back into the research with John and Yetta Goodman of Arizona, I don't know, getting a little esoteric here, but there was corruption involved. There's philosophic errors involved, and as a result, you have 17% of Ontario graduates illiterate.
yes, indeed.
So, how can we change? What's necessary? Now we have drag queen story time
Yes,
versus an age and an era where when I was going to school, I was taught by Christian brothers and Jesuit priests in Newfoundland. So you can imagine the discipline that I had to go through to get my
yeah,
education versus the
mhm,
absolute anarchy approach that is now happening in not just Ontario but all across Canada, the
yeah, yeah.
schools.
Mhm.
Your thoughts on that matter?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said culture. There's been a cultural shift, a cultural change. And going back to 1968 and the Hall Dennis report, I look at that because I remember the report coming out. 1968, I was in this, I forget what, approaching high school, I guess, or something like that. But I remember thinking at the time, this ain't going to work. And I was just a young lad at the time, and because the Hall Dennis report said that we need to go to something called child-centered learning, where it wasn't good. It wasn't good enough to give a child a classic liberal education and teach them how to think and analyze and approach problems and solve them, with logic and thinking. That wasn't good enough. You had to allow the child to explore his own potentialities. It was all about unicorns, pixie dust, and bright sunrises. In the morning, and there we were. It was put in place, and since then, it's never been the same. And when you look at you're going back to the Frankfurt School. You're talking about people like Gramsci, who posited that the best way to take over or assume power and control was to go to a march through the institutions. And one of the first institutions that they attacked was education, because that was foundational. If you change the educational system, then you change the generations to come. And basically, what you're seeing now is that our educational system is fully involved with this cultural Marxism, and it's not the education of the child that's important anymore. What's important is the promotion and promulgation of the ideology. And so I don't know if you noticed, but back in '68, when we had that shift, that Hall Dennis report come in, all of a sudden, sex education was a big thing. Parents were, the parents weren't doing a good job. Uh, Young ladies were getting pregnant. We have to have the government come in and give sex education. And there, right from that point on, it went from, okay, we got to have sex ed in schools. We'll talk about the reproductive system. Then they started talking about techniques, and then they started having demonstrations with condoms and bananas. And then it went to sex is wonderful, and there's all kinds of ways I do and having sex. And now we're at the point now where basically you look at some of the school materials that are being pumped through our public school system, and it'll make you blush. I mean, it's just totally off the rails. So here, I think we're talking about a cultural shift that has been slowly foisted upon us. I must say they're genius at the way they did it, because they did a super job, because now they're in full control of our educational system. And now you can't, if you're in school and you're a parent, if you go to a school board and you say, I don't like this gender affirming care thing that you're bringing on board, and I don't like the fact that you're keeping secrets from me about my children requesting a gender transition. I don't like it. Well, the problem isn't the system. The problem is the parent. The parent should not be, you're being hateful. And now all of a sudden you're up before a human rights code violation, and then into a human rights tribunal. It's just absolutely crazy. So how do you recover that? I mean, we're talking about things that are so dug in. Um, I don't know. I just keep thinking about, China had a situation like this in 1949 in Nanking. Uh, the Japanese flooded, as they took over China, invaded. They would flood cities with drugs, opium, and whole cities would go down with the adult population in opium dens and totally useless. Well, the communist Chinese came in, and this was a really, really dug in problem. And I'm not saying that this should be emulated or anything, but what they did was they took a serious situation and they developed some serious measures. And what they did was they started hanging people from lampposts to get the message across that this will no longer be condoned, and it's no longer going to happen in Nanking or any Chinese city. And you know what? They solved the problem. And now, isn't it odd? But now China's flooding Canada with all kinds of fentanyl and everything, and now we've got the problem. But very interesting.
I noticed that when Doug Ford came out against the tariffs by President Trump, that he obviously did not read the executive order. This is a bit of an aside because I read the executive order that Trump came out and says these are the tariffs that we're going to impose upon Canada. And it says there's one out, and that is that you talk to us, you engage with us about ways to stop the fentanyl crossing
Yes.
the border. That was
Yes.
the out. That was the condition. We won't impose these tariffs if you do this. So I would suggest that Doug Ford or anybody else who pretends to be a leader in this country read the bloody order. But I think what he's counting on is that people are not reading those orders. They're going to be listening to the CBC, CTV, and Global News and the National Post and the Toronto Star for their information, and they won't print the executive order.
No.
You have to go online to get it.
No. What does this tell us? I mean, Robert, what this tells us is that they don't want to go there. They don't want to address the fentanyl problem. There's something in it that is keeping them from doing that, and they've got the full weight and support of the legacy media to make sure that this information doesn't come to light. So this really, really becomes suspicious.
Wasn't there, I think it was a Senate committee or something about that, the RCMP were there, and they asked the RCMP how many fentanyl gangs, organizations there were in the country.
Yes.
You know the number?
4,000.
4,000 fentanyl gangs in this little country of ours. There's a lot of money in stake here.
Yes, and it really makes you wonder where some of that money is flowing for these politicians to be so reticent to really attack the root concern, that is Trump's root concern. And so now we have a situation where you're hearing rumblings from south of the border that Canada can't be trusted. Its officials are infiltrated with cartel, triad, and foreign spies. And if we release some intelligence to them, they're going to blab it and they're going to leak it, and it's going to impact adversely our investigations. So. There's a lot more to come out of this story. There's a lot more legs to this story.
Indeed, there's a lot more stories to cover too, but I think that we should leave it there. This has been a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate, first of all, what you've done for your country during your terms of service and what you've done with the C3RF. And
Thanks.
people, again, can go to CanadianCitizens.org to find out about Major Russ Cooper's Canadian Citizens for Charter Rights and Freedoms. Thank you very much, Russ. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful meeting you for the very first time, and I hope perhaps at some point in the future we can have further conversations.
Well, I certainly hope so. I know there's going to be much more that we're going to be able to talk about. That's for sure.
We live in interesting times.
Yes, we do. Thanks to you. It's been an honor.
Thank you.